Hello and welcome back to the 8th round of the Vaikanze chess tournament, and this was truly a very stunning round. And actually the storylines have continued. So Magnus Carlsen continued his struggle, and actually in a very brutal way. So in the previous 6 rounds he did not manage to beat his sort of lower rated opponent, but today he just played a horrible chess, and he lost to a Yespisenko Alexander, a very young Russian grandmaster, who is actually 200 rating points lower rated than Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, is, and he lost in a very, very uncharacteristic fashion, essentially after like 15 moves. Carlsen just could have resigned. I mean, it's just he played a horrible opening and he immediately blundered, and that was it. However, the game I'm going to show you now is about is by Alireza FIROUZJA. So the other storyline of this tournament is that even though in the first round Alireza still lost to Carlsen, since then he's just been playing magnificent chess. And before this round he was actually already tying for the first place with 3 wins and only one loss against Carlsen. So, and this game is just again actually a fantastic game by FIROUZJA. So let's get started with the game. So it starts out actually quite boringly, because after d4, d5, c4, c6 we see the Slav, and Harikrishna takes on d5, which is the so-called exchange variation, and this is known to be leading to very dry and boring positions, but not in the case when Alireza plays it. So now comes bishop f4, knight c6, e3, bishop f5, kind of standard moves, but now white plays with bishop b5, and this already starts to be a bit offbeat. So usually white here plays a knight c3, already has his knight on c3, then comes some knight f6 move, and this is how sort of mainline theory goes. However, starting with bishop b5, now comes e3, knight c3, and actually Alireza is the one who uses that. Well, I haven't played the move knight f6 yet, so let me put this knight to e7, where it actually guards the c6 knight as well, guards the c6 knight as well. And the point is that after rook c1, you can ask the question with a6 what this bishop wants. Obviously, I'm not going to take on c6 because that would just develop black. So white plays the move bishop e2. And here actually I believe, already approached the new territory. I don't think that any of these were actually like a planned novelty. However, the position is already new. And here also, again, after quite some thinking, Alireza plays the move f6, which definitely shows that he really wants to go for a win. However, f6 is really at first sight a very ugly move. So this is not something that you want to do. Pushing your f-pawn to f6 is usually quite a weakening. However, Alireza's plan is to play sort of g5 probably, and then develop his pieces, something like bishop g7, knight g6, maybe push h5 if possible, h5 at some point, even though now it's well guarded by this bishop. Yeah, so that's probably the idea. However, also Harikrishna felt that yeah, I mean, f6 looks weird, so it's now my turn to grab the initiative, and he plays the move g4, which actually is a good move. So it clearly, of course, it attacks this bishop, and now black goes back to bishop g6, and actually we can see that this position looks quite a bit similar to the Caro-Kann positions that Alireza often plays. So if we go back to see some Caro-Kann, so the similarity comes that after, say, e4, c6, d4, d5, e5, bishop f5, whatever white makes some move, let's, I don't know, play some move, bishop e3, whatever. If you play e6, then there will be these g4, h4, and so on moves coming that try to trap your bishop. And this is very similar to what happens here. The only difference is that this e3 pawn is not on e5. So now comes bishop g6, knight f3. Alireza puts his bishop back to f7, and now comes bishop g3. Here comes h5, so black needs to somehow clarify the position on the king side. Try to use this pawn is already moved. And now comes g5, knight g6. And this is actually the critical position of the, well, I wouldn't say the whole game, but especially for the opening. So here it's very clear that white has quite a nice space advantage thanks to the g5 pawn. And also the black pieces, especially this f7 bishop, is it's pretty badly placed, and also they look a little bit crowded in the king side. But you really have to pay attention what black wants to do here. And actually, Pentala Harikrishna is most likely blunder this. So the plan that black has is just pushing h4 and trying to trap this bishop. So for that reason, the best move, which is actually quite straightforward if you know what black was up to, is to just play the move h4, guard this pawn, stop the black pawn, save your bishop, everything is fine. And white is actually doing quite well because these pieces are actually quite awkward, and this pawn on h5 can one day be quite some weakness if this diagonal ever opens. However, Harikrishna played the move g takes f6, and this obviously just moves into the to the idea of black. So actually it also teaches quite an important lesson, that even though you take something, it's not quite clear that your opponent has to recapture immediately. And there is the intermediate move h4, which was the plan of Alireza, and now white is already in a bit of trouble. So now you have problem saving your bishop. Well, best reaction which white did was taking on g7. Now you have to capture back, and now comes bishop e5. However, this bishop, the e5 square is actually well guarded by black, so white is going to give the pawn back here. Sorry, the other knight was taking first, but at least the same position. So takes, knight takes back, and so if we stop for a second here, it is very clear that black managed to get the advantage of the two bishop. Also, black has a nice control over the center with these two central pawns, and even though this h-pawn well, it seems probably a little bit weak for the time being, it also means that if ever white castles, which he actually will, his king might be very weak after playing some h3 move, and all these files are very open. But at the same time, the game is not yet not over. Actually, black is probably better, but white also has a lot of things to do. So he plays the move knight d4, and want to highlight that actually this e6 pawn is still quite weak. The black king will have a hard time finding any shelter. It's obvious that long castle is not going to happen because you are just moving into this horrible pin. But if you castle short, then you have all these files already open, and you have your pawn pushed up. So yeah, so the game is very sharp and goes on, but as we probably all know very well, Alireza really like these sharp positions. So now comes rook c8, white castles, knight c6, and here comes bishop g4, a very good move to create some counterplay. So now there is a lot of pressure against this e6 pawn, and the point is if you take on d4, which Alireza did, then you take back with the pawn, and now you threaten to play rook e1 and put even further pressure on the e6 pawn. Now Alireza plays rook c6, it not only protects the pawn, but also there was this pin that it's quite a useful thing to move out of. Here comes knight e2, and actually here Alireza again goes for the continuation that results in the most complications. However, it might not be the best one. So here the best move is to develop your queen, also with quite some pressure. So there is also this pin, there is pressure along this diagonal, and white plays something like h3. After rook c1, queen c1, you can actually exchange the queens and claim that in this ending after king d7 you've got the two bishops, and the position is actually very open with a lot of weaknesses, so black's advantage is very clear. But this is not what Alireza did. He went for h3 to complicate matters even further. Now comes rook c3 and rook h4 attacking this bishop, and now the rook c3 actually shows this is a very nice rook lift. So now comes rook g3, protecting this pawn, keeping an eye on this pawn, and also the g file could be a potential way to attack with white. So now comes queen c7. If you were to fall for the trick, so bishop e6 is actually seems like it wins some stuff, but it actually doesn't, because after bishop e6, this queen just guards this bishop. So after rook e1, Alireza decided, well, my queen is on this diagonal, sorry, on this file, so it's definitely time to move out of it. And actually he plays the move king f8. However, the computer strongly suggests to move to d8 and to go to that side. Yeah, well, these are computers, so king f8 looks a lot more logical as a human. And after queen d3, now comes actually the plan of Alireza. And here, actually, the first time in this video, I invite you to stop the video and trying to find a way to put even further pressure on white. So the point is that your pieces are actually quite well placed. This bishop is the only one that looks a bit strange, but there's not really a direct way to improve this. But you still have the two bishops. And the point is that with the bishops, you really have to open up the position. And Alireza goes for it with e5. And the point is, if you take, then the bishop takes back, and this is just too much. Black just becomes too active. This rook is immediately under attack, and yeah, white is in trouble. So for that reason, never didn't take on e5. However, played the move queen e3. Alireza countered with queen d6, and now the queens are off the board. And after bishop takes h3, a takes d1, a takes d4, we reached actually the ending. So black has the two bishops, which is a very good thing to do, even though your f7 bishop is not doing much for the time being. You have a little bit ugly pawn structure with these double d pawns. However, these are actually passed pawns. And also for the well, for the rest of the game, it was also shown in the middle game that, well, the white structure on the king side is quite weak, and still the white king might be in some danger. So now comes a very strong move from white. He plays the move knight c1 and put the knight in front of the pawns, blockading them. As we all very well know, the knight is the best blockading piece. And it actually does give up a pawn, because after rook h6, well, white needs to prove bishop g2, and black does take a pawn. However, after knight d3, actually white did reach a dream scenario. All his pieces are very well placed. And after rook h5, you could actually argue that the position is more or less equal. You should just not really do anything with white. You just even make a move king f1, rook f3, something that doesn't ruin your own position, and then let's see what black can do. And it's not very clear what you can do with the black pieces. Your rooks are pretty much crammed over on the king side. This bishop on f7 is quite weak, and also now this bishop on g7, they both are just essentially biting into their own pawns, so they are not particularly active. While white has a very nice knight on d3, this bishop keeps an eye on this d5 pawn, so you have trouble moving your pieces. This rook is very active on the g file. The other rook cuts away the king, so yeah, this actually looks horrible for white. However, now, quite uncharacteristically for Harikrishna, he starts weakening his own position. He plays the move f4, which of course has a meaning. He wants to take care of the e5 square, potentially one day jump with the knight. However, this move is very much weakens the e4 and e3 square, further weakens the king, and especially the dark squares. Now Alireza tries to regroup his pieces, plays rook c6, bishop f3, rook goes back, rook g2, rook g6. Now actually it would have been better for white to take on g6, because he further goes with his pawn, but now also the e5 square is weak, and it gets to be clear that actually white has a very weak king, and also all these weaknesses are on the center and the king side. So Alireza decides not to exchange the pieces, goes back, and now he actually has a very nasty threat of playing rook h3 and attacking on the third rank. And Harikrishna saw that this is going to be a huge problem, and he plays the move knight f4, which turns out to be actually not a decisive mistake, but a huge mistake. So here again, I invite you to stop the video and find a way why this move was a bad one. So as I mentioned, these are his bishops, but they are both just looking at their own pawns. However, now black has the chance to sacrifice the d pawn by pushing d3, allowing the dark square bishop to enter the game, and now white is in a very, very, very huge trouble. So here comes the move. You have to take this one. Now comes bishop d4, and the whole point is that if the white king just moves away, then actually there is no direct checkmate, even though it seems like, but there is a very straightforward way to just finish off the game, which is by starting rook h3. The point is that you attack this bishop, and not only the bishop, but also behind the knight. So it seems like the only move is bishop e2 to protect this, but this is exactly how you run into checkmate. And rook g1 takes, and that's it. So for that reason, for bishop d4, the only move was knight f2, which Harikrishna did play, but now FIROUZJA just enters with his rook and going to collect all these pawns, or at least one of them. Now comes king f1 and just take the pawn. And now they actually made the time control, and we can just say that white is in an almost hopeless position. This bishop is beautiful, the rook is very active. This bishop is going to at some point join the party. There is the potentially other rook coming over. The white pieces are just horribly passive. And we haven't talked about the fact that actually black is up a pawn. So things looks horrible. Now comes rook e2, rook b1 check, rook e1. Alireza plays the move rook b6. It turns out that it's a clearer way if you just exchange the rooks first and you leave your rook on the h file, because actually then the white knight is actually tied down. You cannot move your knight because then something like rook h2 or rook h1 comes in. So now you can just bring your king in, even this way or this way, and well, the white pieces are just way too passive. Black is up a pawn, black has two bishops, which is completely hopeless. However, now Alireza put his rook to the other side, and now the white knight could go to d3, and again the white knight finally goes his way back to d3, and suddenly white has some chances to survive. This knight is just beautiful, guarding all these squares. It's really nice piece. So now comes bishop c3, exchanging some rooks, king f2, king e7, the rook goes to h2, so again we can see that the black rook left the h file, now the white rook can come in. Comes king f6 and king e3. And all of a sudden actually it's not so clear what's going on here. So white would like to somehow activate his pieces, potentially play king f4, give a check on rook h6, and it's not very clear what you can do here. And there's also a nice little trick here. So if you take the pawn, which seems to be unguarded, then white can just take on d5, and if you take, then comes rook h5 check. Obviously the bishop is hanging behind, and after king e6 there is one more fork to collect this bishop, and well, only pawns on one side, eliminating the bishop pair. White has some surviving chances. So for that reason Alireza did not take on f5, but played the move king g5. So he wants to shoulder away this king and further activate his own one. And here actually Harikrishna makes another mistake. So it would be actually quite a straightforward move to just move your rook to the 7th rank, attacking this bishop. But the problem, which probably Harikrishna did not see how to solve, is that after d4, king goes up, but now actually another pawn is hanging and black can just take one more. However, all of a sudden, white has very active pieces, his bishop is out of the game, the rook is also quite far away, and white can start creating chances against the black king. So you can give a check on h5, comes king f6, and you can actually keep on checking. If you go here, then there's another check coming in here. You don't want to say go to f7 because then the knight comes in. So here actually the best way to continue for black is to just go back to the 8th rank. However, now comes rook d7, and now white has all sort of active plans, coming in with this guy, pushing your king in, putting the bishop somewhere, and well, Alireza would have a very hard time converting this advantage. However, actually Harikrishna decided to play another move. He removes his knight again from d3 to c5, and that once again turns out to be a bad decision. So now comes rook b5 attacking this knight, and the problem is that now you cannot just retreat anymore, because then your pawn is indeed hanging. The d5 pawn is double guarded from here and here, so for that reason there is no more bishop d5 trickery, and black is just up by too much material. So after rook b5, Tata decided to make the move rook h7, attacking this bishop, but now the black bishop can move back, and thanks to this dark square bishop, there was no d4 yet moved, the rook cannot go to g7. And now here comes rook c7, but now finally we can collect the pawn, and the problem is that after knight takes b7, now really comes d4, and all of a sudden black pieces are just beautiful, the white pieces are looking horrible, and this is the beginning of the end for white. Then the issue is that if you go to d3, which you would really like to do, after rook b2 you don't have a way to counter the rook to do checkmate. So you might give a check here, king f4 comes, knight e4, and then you just lost your bishop. And so after d4, Harikrishna went back, but it's quite clear that the game is going to be over very soon, and Well, Alireza actually has this very nice style that he wants to finish the games but in a stylish fashion. So now comes king. So you can just take pawns here and just win the game eventually. But now he comes further with the king, with the plan of pushing d3. And after knight d6, now not d3 is the final move, but bishop d2, and the white king is going to be checkmated. The two bishops, the rook, the king, the active king, and the potential of the d pawn is well ruining white's day. And here came king f1, rook b1, bishop d1, and well, they were both actually in some time trouble, especially white. So bishop d1 seems to highlight loses for several reasons. You can also just take, and the trick from Harikrishna was probably to play king e2, and now it's a double attack. But even this one doesn't work because black can just play the move rook c1, attacking the rook, and that's it. But Alireza was even more stylish. He played the move d3. There is no way to defend this bishop, and the white king is going to be checkmated in a split second. So this way Alireza won, and he managed to win his 4th game in the Vaikanzi Masters tournament on the same exact day that Magnus Carlsen went down. And actually now FIROUZJA is leading the tournament. He has I think half point lead over everybody else. The chasing pack consists of Fabiano Caruana, Anish Giri, and 2 youngsters of Yespisenko, who just beat Magnus Carlsen, and who is the other guy? The other guy is the Dutch one, Jordan van Forest. And Magnus Carlsen actually is back to just to 50%, so he's behind, like 1.5 point behind now Alireza. So that's it about this game. And yeah, tomorrow is going to be a free day or an off day. I might actually do another game from another beautiful game of Alireza tomorrow. So see you then.